Welcome to the 360 Sports Network Fantasy Football Virtual Draft Guide. I'm James Dotson. Here today we're going to talk about kickers and how you do the kicking position in your fantasy draft and what role that they end up playing. The kicker position is one of the most debated positions in all of fantasy football, to be honest, and in fact, there are many leagues out there that don't even have a kicker position anymore just because they feel they are that irrelevant. And so, for that reason, many people just ignore the kicking position, and probably rightfully so. There's just very little value at the kicking position. However, though, you can definitely use some good strategy, and it can play big in your draft, and in all honesty, the kicker could make the difference between a winning team and a losing team. So we're going to talk a little bit about what to do in the kicking position, and in short, it's all about knowing what your league is and how it's set up. With the ever-expanding world that we get here in terms of online games with the internet and fantasy games, the scoring systems are getting much more complex, that you can end up having a huge difference, that a 27 to 28 yard field goal could be an extra, 0.2 of a point. You can make it as complex as you want. It's all very cumbersome and crazy, but here's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at three different types of setups. Whether your league setup is just a traditional just points, how many points they score, whether you have losing points if you miss field goals, and whether you get a lot of the bonus points for longer field goals. So let's start with that one, with bonus points. That means usually you get 3 points for a league, or for a field goal in your league, but then if it's above 40 yards, you get a bonus point, so now it's 4 points for a field goal. If it's above 50 yards, then you get 5 points, or something like that. I've seen even crazier than that. There was one league that I was in last year that you got 3 points for a field goal, but you got 5 bonus points if it was over 50 yards. So that means you actually get more points for a 50-yard field goal than you would for a guy scoring a touchdown. And that can be pretty huge right there, especially when the average normally for kickers is only 8 points in a week. So that's 8 points on one kick possibly right there. So if you're in one of these leagues that gives a lot of the bonus points, make sure you look for the kickers who are having to attempt the longest field goals. And obviously, not just attempting it, you have to be able to be making them too. Just a few guys, for example, Justin Tucker, he went 4 for 9 from beyond 50 yards last year. Greg Zuerlein was 5 for 7 from beyond 50. Matt Bryant attempted 10 field goals from beyond 50 yards, and he made 7 of them. That's huge. Blair Walsh, 5 for 9. Those are the guys who... it's kind of like, the teams are stalling out a lot, and they're having to attempt long field goals. And especially a guy like Zuerlein and Bryant, they're playing on turf, so that makes it a little bit easier to be hitting the long field goals as well. So just a couple of pointers to look out there. Now, as for if you are losing points, like if you're missing any field goal, especially the short field goals is where you see, maybe if it was 3 points for a field goal, maybe you'd be losing 3 points if they miss a field goal that's under 40 yards. It's not a huge difference because in the NFL, not many are missing under 40-yard field goals, but and now with the extra point going back, we can see that being an issue too, and missing extra points costing you some points there too. So just keep an eye on that. I look at the highest percentage kickers in that case. People who, no matter where it is, probably aren't going to miss. Dan Bailey, Adam Vinatieri, Stephen Gostkowski, those are the best ones. And again, check and make sure, because I've also seen leagues where even if it's a 68-yard field goal, you're still going to miss points if they miss the kick. So maybe a guy like Justin Tucker, who attempted 10 field goals from beyond 50 yards but only made 4 of them, that's maybe somebody to stay away from in this case. Again, it can make a huge difference in your team. And obviously the easiest one for you to go with is, the easiest system is just 3 points for a field goal, doesn't matter the distance, 1 point for an extra point. That's it. And for this one, it's just, the obvious answer is just go with the teams that are going to score a lot of points. So New England, Gostkowski, Vinatieri for the Colts for sure, definitely the strong picks. Connor Barth, especially the way they ended the year last year in Denver, he looked really strong. Cody Parkey was one of the top scorers in all the league with his kicking in Philadelphia. So those are the players to look for in that standard just point setup. But personally, no matter what the league setup is, here's my philosophy when you draft a kicker. Don't draft one. The difference between kicker number 1 and kicker number 20 is a total of 15 points for the entire year. That means less than 1 point difference per week between the top 10 kickers. So even if half of the teams in a league end up taking 2 kickers, which never happens, obviously, I'm still losing 1 point per game in the end. I'm not going to worry about that. I will refuse to pick a kicker in the draft unless the league rules will require me to do so. I'll use that late round pick to get an extra position player, somebody who could be a huge boom in the end for me, somebody who could come out of nowhere and do something, whereas, a kicker who that can make a 1 point difference, that's not going to bother me too much. So, yes, this does mean I'm going to have an empty spot on my roster that I'm going to have to fill before the first week of the season begins. But, think about all the injuries that we get in the preseason anymore, especially when people don't go and make contact with anybody. You're likely going to lose a player or two to, due to an injury or being sent down to the practice squad or suspension. Stuff is always going on. And when that happens, now you know who you're going to get rid of, and you have that open spot now to pick up that kicker before week 1. And even that, a couple guys who you think could be a big boom, and they just don't pan out in the preseason, so that's the guy you're going to get rid of right away. So I'd rather take a risk and then come back and get your kicker at a future date. Here's the thing to keep in mind, too, and we'll talk about this in a later podcast. Know that when you have that empty spot right here in your kicker position, your projected stats for the year are probably going to be skewed. Again, about 8 points per game you're going to lose without a kicker. So when you don't pick a kicker, you're now projected probably to have a losing record because you're losing that 8 points per game on your projected stats. So don't go crazy if you see that your draft is rated really lowly because you have a low projected score and whatever. Take it with a grain of salt. You're going to thank me later for not getting a kicker. Well, that's it for our Kickers podcast. Make sure you check out all of our position podcasts and everything else on the fantasy football world for our virtual draft guide right at 360sportsnetwork.com. And again, our customizable cheat sheets are up there as well, so make sure you use them to get your draft to be as good as it can be. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.